Good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and begin.
So, good afternoon. I'm George Trieste. I'm the director of the State Performance Plan Technical Assistance Project, better known as SPP-TAP. The project is run out of the Napa County Office of Education, funded by the California Department of Education Special Education Division. Welcome. I'd now like to introduce Connie Sofa-Broussard, our Technical Assistance Coordinator, who will take it from here.
Thanks, George. Okay, before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about how you will communicate during this webinar. And I know some of you were on last month, but we're going to go through this for the folks that weren't with us. So we're going to be using the chat as a tool for communication because we have your phone lines muted. So at various points in today's session, you'll be invited to use the chat tool. And before we move on, I want to give everyone an opportunity to test using the tool by typing in a short message. So to do this, click your mouse into the box in the lower right corner of your screen and type your message and then press enter. So go ahead and try this now, and I'm going to wait just a moment for people to post a comment. Okay, that looks good. A lot of hellos. All right. So as questions arise for you today, please use the chat tool to post your question. And at any point during the session, you can just type in there. If you happen to be just listening by phone and you have a question, you can email your question to us at George's email. So that's george.trieste@spptap.org. I'm going to spell it for you, george.trieste@spptap.org. And if by chance we don't get to your questions during the webinar, we will be able to respond via email afterwards. And we also have our follow-up teleconference on January 26th, so we can use that time as well if needed. Okay? So next I'm going to talk about a different tool. In addition to the chat tool, we'll also be using the poll tool. And when we open and close a poll, your screen will change each time. So you'll see information briefly about DIM. It'll show up in the slide area, and that's normal. So I'm going to open a poll right now, and you can see what to expect during the webinar.
Connie?
Yes.
I'm sorry to be unmuted, but I am on the computer, but apparently I do not recall my password.
You don't need a password for this, DMO?
Okay, well, let's see. So I still have to be in the SPPT team collaboration site, right?
No.
To do the online thing with the chat?
No. No, the link for the DIM was on the email about the webinar. And you know what, I can get to you in just a few minutes.
I'm sorry.
We'll move through this and get Shelley started, and I'll come back to you, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so we should be moving on to the poll, and it looks like it's taking a little bit of time here.
And Shelley, this is Rebecca. So try closing the poll and then just open it up again.
Okay. The previous version had opened and 5 people voted, but now it's open again from my screen with 0 votes.
Okay. Just close it and reshare the presentation, and then we'll move on. I think it's just stuck for whatever reason right now.
Oh, because I'm seeing votes coming in. I've got 5 votes now again.
Okay. Wonderful. Yeah. So it's probably just on our end that we're spinning. Okay. Well, hopefully you were able to see that, and as I said, it'll be used during the presentation, so no worries if you didn't, but I do want you to know not to panic if there's, as I said, the DIM that shows up for a little while. And you will be able to see the results of the poll immediately, so we'll be able to share with you how the group voted on any particular poll. So I'm going to move on now to just a couple housekeeping items. And very quickly, the first one is a reminder that this event is being recorded. We are going to be archiving this webinar, so everything is being recorded. And then secondly, very briefly after this webinar, you will receive an evaluation, and it's just a few questions to help us with our follow-up teleconference. So you'll receive this via email. Keep an eye out for it, and please respond as soon as possible. So next, I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's presenter, Dr. Shelley Zion. And for those of you that are just participating on phone, we are on slide number 6 on your PowerPoint. So, Dr. Shelley Zion is a professor at the University of Colorado Denver School of Education and Human Development. And in addition, she is currently the Executive Director of the Center for Continuing and Professional Education and the Culturally Responsive Urban Education Center. Her extensive body of work is focused on culturally responsive educational systems, disproportionality, and systems change. Dr. Zion is the co-author of the National Center for Culturally Responsive Education Systems publication titled Preventing Disproportionality by Strengthening District Policies and Procedures, an Assessment and Strategic Planning Process. And she'll be talking about that with us right away. So here's Dr. Zion.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here today. Actually, I'm a little less glad to be here in Colorado by webinar. I'd be more glad to be there in California because right now it's 5 degrees in Denver. I have to assume it's a little bit nicer there. I hope that you're ready. We're going to do a fairly quick but hopefully comprehensive overview of the INCREST District Assessment Tool, which you should also have available to you either electronically or printed out. We will do a couple of activities where you want to refer to that document. So if you don't have that yet, get it ready. Our agenda for today, we're going to focus really the entire conversation on how to use this INCREST tool with district teams that you may be working with around issues of disproportionality. But the areas that we'll cover, and I want to go over this so that you know what's coming in case we have, you have questions that may be answered later on in the presentation. First, we'll talk a little bit about that frame the tool. Then we'll talk about how the tool was developed, how it's been used. We'll talk about how it's organized. Then we'll talk about the most challenging parts, which include getting the right team on board. We'll share an agenda that you might use for an initial team level meeting. We'll talk about some common challenges and questions, and we will provide some opportunities for follow-up and questions from you. So starting with the assumptions that frame this tool. And these are particularly important for you to understand if you decide to use this and to facilitate this because they really do influence all of the ways that we ask the questions we ask, the ways that the tool is focused. So the first assumption you'll see on your screen, the big circle with the smaller circle inside of it that says special education. This assumption really gets at the idea that disproportionality is not a special education issue by itself. It's one part of a larger conversation, and it's an education issue. Much like RTI, what happens in general education creates the context for some students to be successful and others not. So special education really becomes that flag that there's something not working well in the general education context for some of our students, and it gives us an idea of where we begin to look. But we do have to look in that general education context to find what's creating the situation that leads us to overrepresentation in special education. The second key assumption is that culture matters, and this is on slide 10 if you're following along by phone. So when we talk about culture, we're talking about the values and beliefs and behaviors that groups of people use to inform their view of and actions in the world. We all have culturally informed values, beliefs, and behaviors that help us make sense of our world. Too often I think that we begin to think about culture and we think about those people who have a culture, and we need to be really more aware of the ways that all of our different cultural norms, values, and beliefs interact, and the ways that schools are set up to privilege some cultural ways of being and to marginalize others. So understanding the importance of culture and that culture is present in everything we do is another foundational assumption. The third foundational assumption is the idea that we want to change the system. We're not trying to change just one little piece. If you make changes to one small part of a system but not attending to the rest of it, what tends to happen is the system changes back. And so when we talk about educational systems and really looking at how you do systems change, we focus on people, policy, and practices. And you'll see that, I think, woven throughout the tool, that we ask questions that include questions about who are the people, who's being involved, who are the stakeholders, which voices are being heard, which ones aren't, how do you provide supports and resources to people. We'll also talk about policies and how policies might inform what we're doing or constrain what we're doing, how we develop policies that ensure opportunities for equitable access and participation, or how some policies can be in fact set up to prohibit equitable opportunities and outcomes. Then we'll talk about practices, which of course are the things that people do, and we talk about practices in terms of classroom level, building level, district level. It's really all of those things that we do that, again, either help us get to more equitable places or constrain us from being able to do so. We'll then talk a little bit as far as key assumptions go about the features of culturally responsive educational systems. There'll be a couple of slides that show that on slides 12 and slide 13. Here on slide 12, which is where we're at now, we've got one really big idea, and that is that in a culturally responsive educational system, the culture, language, heritage, and experiences of all students and all families are valued, respected, and used to facilitate learning and development. And I think that feels like a pretty obvious statement, but again, it kind of underlies all of the assumptions that we made in the development of this tool, that you have to look closely at every policy, at every practice, at every interaction, at all of the assumptions we make to see if, in fact, this is truly happening or not. The second part of features of culturally responsive educational systems are these three big ideas. The first one is that all practitioners and administrators assume responsibility for the learning of all students from all cultural and linguistic backgrounds. If you were walking around a school building or looking into a classroom or part of a team meeting in which culturally responsive educational systems, kind of the goals were playing out, you would not hear people saying things about those kids, the ELA kids are not my responsibility, the special ed kids are not my responsibility, why don't you handle your at-risk kids? Because we wouldn't be dividing up responsibility and accountability for kids and labeling kids and really kind of handing over that, because we would all take accountability and responsibility for every single student. The second key feature here is that every student benefits academically, socioculturally, and linguistically. This one's a really important one because often, given the policy constraints and just the realities of the educational systems and environments that we work within, we focus on academic success and tend to not pay as much attention to sociocultural or linguistic success. And what that creates is a situation in which students and families must choose between academic success and belonging to within their own home, family, community, and other cultural backgrounds. Once you set that situation up, you'll have students who choose to not participate in the academic system because the trade-off is too expensive, it's too high of a trade-off. The final idea here is that in a culturally responsive educational system, high-quality teachers, programs, curriculum, and resources are available to every student. And really it was in looking at this third piece of it that we decided we needed to develop a rubric that districts could use to really assess how well they were doing in these areas. And so that was kind of the impetus for the development of this tool, helping people to think through what that would look like across multiple levels. So now we're going to try our first poll activity, and we'll hope that that works for everyone. As I open the polling questions, as Connie had mentioned, your screen will change for a second. If for some reason you don't see the poll activity, could you just type a little note into the chat section so we have a sense of how many people it's working for and not working for? But in this poll, there'll be 3 questions. Each question will they'll show up one at a time, so we'll do the first question, Everybody will have an opportunity to respond to that. Then I'll close that, open the second one, and so on. What you'll see in your screen is a fragment of the question because of the character limit. And then you'll see a set of choices to rank in the poll. A number 1 will mean you strongly agree with the statement that is in the poll. 2 would be somewhat agree. 3 would be somewhat disagree. And 4 would be strongly disagree. So as you get ready to move forward into this poll, think about that 1 is strongly agree, 4 is strongly disagree, and I'm about to share the first question, so you'll see this. I will read it aloud a couple of times because you can't see the whole fragment. So the first question here says, in general, the district leaders I work with understand that disproportionality is a result of challenges in the general education environment. Go ahead and vote if you see that. 1 is a strongly agree, 4 is strongly disagree. And the question again, in general, the district leaders I work with understand that disproportionality is a result of challenges in the general education environment. So far I have about 8 votes showing up. Remember, if you can't see the poll to vote, type a note into the chat section for us. Now we have a total of 10 votes. 8 of those votes named somewhat agree as their position, 2 strongly agree, and 1 strongly disagree. So in general, given your perspective from the districts you work with, and now we have 9 in the somewhat agree, it sounds like you at least have an opening to be able to have the conversation about disproportionality as a general education conversation. And that's a good thing. In many places that we do this work, we find, in fact, way more people in the disagree section there, so that feels like a positive for y'all. I'm going to close this question, move to the second question. You'll see your screen change. This question, also on a 1 to 4, strongly agree is a 1, strongly disagree is a 4, says the majority of people that I work with in districts understand the impact of culture on educators, students, and in classrooms. Go ahead and vote in the poll as soon as you feel ready. 1 is a strongly agree, 4 strongly disagree. I'll read the question one more time. The majority of people that I work with in districts understand the impact of culture on educators, students, and in classrooms. So far we have 8 votes registering, 12 votes. Well, there we go, 12 votes. 1 is strongly agree, 4 at somewhat agree, 6 at somewhat disagree, and 1 at strongly disagree. This is interesting to me. It's also fairly typical, I think, of what I see out there, is that, there will be a few districts that are further along in this, but in many places, the conversation about culture and the role of culture in classroom environments really hasn't been fully explored. I'm going to close this poll and open the final question in this poll. So watch for your screen to change. The final question should be up, and it says, district personnel understand the importance of supporting changes in people, policy, and practice to impact disproportionality. Vote when you're ready. And again, 1 is strongly agree, 4 is strongly disagree. And this question again, district personnel understand the importance of supporting changes in people, policy, and practice to impact disproportionality. 12 votes shown. We've got 2 at strongly agree, 4 at somewhat agree, 4 at somewhat disagree, and 2 at strongly disagree. So it seems to me that your district may be a little split in the degree to which they're thinking systemically about these kinds of questions. Now I'm going to close the poll. We're done with the polling activity for this round. And I'm going to reopen the PowerPoint. So once again, expect your screen to change a little bit. And then we'll continue forward. Okay, you should be able to see the PowerPoint again. Now we're at the point in the agenda where I really want to talk a little bit about how this tool was developed and used and some of the technical aspects of it. This tool was developed, the National Center for Culturally Responsive Educational Systems was funded by the Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. We were funded in 2001. As we did our work around 2004 and 5 is when we realized we really needed to do some tool development. So the development on this tool really happened between 2005 and 6. We did do an advisory group to help us put the tool together. That advisory group included state directors, primarily of special education, but a couple of others, district leadership, members of the Regional Resource Center from the states that we were working with, our project officer from the Department of Education, and our team from INCREST. We piloted it in 9 states, so once we spent, probably good 6 months of the year going back and forth over what were the things that really mattered and how might you organize such a rubric and what would be the descriptors in it, we piloted it in 9 states. The states that we piloted it in required districts who had been identified as significantly disproportionate to use the tool as part of their planning process. And they worked through that. They worked through that in a variety of different ways, depending on the size of the district, the complexity of the issues in the district, and basically used that to do their planning process. We were also working with them as technical assistance consultants, and so we did provide additional trainings and supports to them as they worked through that process. And as part of that, then I'll share some of the resources that we used with them at the end of the presentation, but also as you begin thinking about districts that you might want to use this tool with, if you'd like to get some information from me about similar districts that have used that and maybe have some connections or contacts to talk to, I'd be happy to share that information. Next, what you'll see on your screen, and I think we're on slide 16, is an actual picture of the cover of the tool. And really, I just want to say a couple of things about the strengths and challenges of using this particular tool. It does provide a step-by-step process for district-level teams to engage in some deep conversations and looking at evidences around where they're at in terms of policy and practices that might be either creating or helping eliminate issues of inequity. It does require that folks use evidence. It does provide a rubric for them to kind of gauge where they're at in terms of against other people. There are strengths to this rubric. The primary one, I think, is that it begins with general education rather than focusing on special education. So it really is looking at that education environment broadly. It does focus beyond disproportionality and look at issues of equity across the district. So again, we're not assuming that the only equity issue we're concerned with is that of special education identification and placement, but really looking at how historically marginalized groups fare in general. It does require the use of evidence to support rankings, which is, I think, also a powerful part of it. It's a rubric, so it does provide examples of what each standard looks like at a beginning stage, at a developing stage, and at standard kind of level. The challenges involved in using this tool are a couple, but they're ones that are worth really thinking about before you decided to use it. One was that it is an extremely time-intensive process. We do always recommend that you do the whole process and that you're aware of that going in so that you can do some planning and so that district folks don't show up to that initial meeting assuming that they'll get done with it in a day. It is also only as good as the breadth of the team membership. So if you only have special education personnel present, it's not going to go as deep as if you have people from other departments. And we'll talk in a minute about how you do that leadership team or how you create that team. And also it does require some pretty complex conversations around the definitions and what we mean by some of the terms that are used and what a district values and kind of what their assumptions and visions are. And if you don't do that work with the district in terms of kind of uncovering some of that and doing some of those harder conversations, then you're likely to have just a surface level understanding on the part of the team around what it really means. So those are the big ideas about the tool itself. I'm going to talk for a second about the way it's organized. So now on slide 17, what you see is the 4 standards. So the tool is organized around 4 standards. There are 23 focus areas spread out across those standards. The standards all start with the core functions of the district. Then they move into instructional issues, into special ed or individualized education concerns, and end with accountability. There is a key question that guides each of those standards. The key question for core functions you'll see there on the screen. It asks, are equitable educational opportunities available to and accessed by all students? In terms of instructional services, we're asking whether learning environments are designed to support achievement for diverse learners. At the individualized education or special education level, we're looking at whether children with disabilities are ensured access to, participation in, and progress in the general education curriculum. And at the accountability level, we're really looking at student performance and the degree to which that's used to guide instruction and improvement across the previous areas. One of the cautions that I would name here is that often districts will look at this and go, well, but it's disproportionality and it's a special education thing, so let's just look at the standard around individualized education. And I would say, again, if you think back to the key assumptions that I named at the beginning, that's really not okay, because if you believe the philosophy that we're operating from, which is that equitable educational opportunities and outcomes should occur in the general education setting, you need to start looking there to make sure that the context is set up well for students to be successful. And then special education is one part of that system, but it's not isolated and standing alone by itself. On this slide, you'll see the rubric, a little screenshot of one of the rubric categories. You can also see this on page 11 of the rubric itself if you'd like to follow along there and be able to actually read the text. What I want to walk through here for a second is the organization of this rubric. You'll see in the first column that actually names the focus area that we're looking at and describes that. So in this one, this is focus area number 5, which is that the district identifies and utilizes multiple approach to supporting student engagement and academic success. Then there's a prompt, a question prompt for them following that says, describe the strategies and programs used to support engagement and academic success. How are students, families, and communities engaged in conversations about school? Are the needs of diverse students incorporated into understanding of what engagement and success look like? So that really just kind of provides a series of questions for the group to begin talking about and kind of get them ready to think a little bit more deeply about the focus area itself. The next 3 columns are the different elements of the rubric, whether you're beginning, developing, or at standard. And you can see even just by the amount of text in each of those that it gets more and more complex as you move toward the standard. Oftentimes in the beginning level, what you'll see is people can bring evidence of lists or documents, but they don't really have any evidence of how they train, support, implement, or resource the item in question. At a developing level, in this one, for example, they're talking about actively seeking input from families, students, and communities. And then at the standard level, it moves towards actively involving families, students, and communities. And so that's where, when I said a minute ago that it's really critical to work around the definitions with the teams that you're working with, really being able to describe and define what is the difference between seeking input and involving is a really key idea, because throughout all the rubrics there are key terms like that. In my mind, seeking input might be posting your performance plan or whatever on your website and inviting feedback, or maybe even mailing something out to families that then, if they have the time and the interest and the resources, the access to be able to review and provide feedback, they're able to. Whereas active involvement to me means something entirely different, that really is looking at collaboration and partnership, where they're active participants in maybe designing and developing the plan in the first place. The final column on the rubric is the evidence column. And in that evidence column, what we've tried to do is just insert some examples of the kinds of evidences that we think a district might have available or might want to look at in order to really rank themselves appropriately within the rubric. It's not meant to be comprehensive. They definitely don't have to try to gather all of those. It's really just serving as kind of a mental starting point for them to think about. So now, we're ready to move into an activity, and I'm hoping that you'll enjoy this activity. What I'm going to do in this activity is give you an opportunity to look at one of the elements of the rubric and ask some questions. So the first part of the activity, I'm going to read off to you some assignments. I'll give each of you one area, one focus area to review. Once I read that to you, you'll scan the item to get a sense of what it's asking for. Really look at the difference between levels of the rubric, types of evidence, that kind of thing. You'll have about 5 minutes to do that reading and review, and then to post in the chat section a question or comment. And question is fine, comment is fine, just post those in the chat section. Do make sure you include the number of the focus area that you're looking at, so if you looked at focus area number 3, specify that. You can type those questions into chat at any time during this 5 minutes. I will give you kind of a 1 minute countdown by minute so that you know how much time that you have left. And then I will attempt to answer questions that come up as they come. So what I'd like to do is, if your last name starts with the letters A through F, take focus area 3, which is on page 10, and look at it. If your last name starts with letters G through M, take focus area 9, which is on page 13. If your last name starts with the letters N through S, take focus area 15, which is on page 16. And if your last name starts with the letter T through Z, take focus area 20, which is on page 18. I'll repeat that one more time, but go ahead and get started reading if you'd like. It will be quiet on the phone during that 5 minutes other than my interruptions to remind you of the time going by. So last names A through F, focus area 3, page 10. Last names G through M, focus area 9 on page 13. Last names N through S, focus area 15, which is on page 16. And last names T through Z, focus area 20. Those are also listed in the chat in case you couldn't hear me, and I'll give you 5 minutes. 4 minutes. Three minutes. Two minutes. You have 1 more minute to go ahead and get your question or comment posted. Okay, I am going to see if I can summarize and begin to answer some questions starting at the beginning. And for those questions that I may not be able to respond to very thoroughly, we'll have an opportunity for you to submit questions, or we'll capture some of those questions and be able to send that information. We have a follow-up phone call in about a week to be able to answer those. If you do have additional comments, please go ahead and continue to insert them. The list is getting kind of long, though, so I hope you don't lose any of you. I'm looking at a comment up at the beginning about Focus Area 15. Actually, I think I saw 2 different comments about Focus Area 15 asking about evidence. and the fact that there's only one thing listed in the evidence column there, which is kind of some examples of print media. And I think the question that I'm seeing is the district supposed to come up with other ideas or what? In fact, yeah, the district does need to come up with some other ideas. I think when we were developing this and looking at resources, we were looking at things that we imagined would be easily accessible and available in terms of evidences. But as you look back into the first column of that focus area, what you see is they're talking about, what's the outreach plans, et cetera. So when we're talking about print, that could include agendas from those meetings, participation lists, the invitations that went out. So the fact that it only lists to include kind of some print items, I think is actually pretty broad of anything you have that would be evidence of your communication out to families. I'm seeing a question on Area 3 that I'm not sure that I quite understand. It says framework is progressively including resources. That's Dennis. So if you want to clarify this, Dennis, maybe I can answer better. Go ahead and add something else in the chat. It says missing outcomes. And what I think you might be referring to is focus area 3, in fact, only talks about resources and does not talk about outcomes. The difficulty in doing an activity where everybody only gets to see one out of the 23 choices. I think if you go through it again from the very beginning to the very end, then you will see all of those elements, but so each particular focus area really does focus in on a pretty narrow question. Then I see a question or a comment about on focus area 9 that it progressively moves closer to the classroom. That's exactly right. Opportunities to begin to address issues of home language. That's very true. Focus area 20, Carol, there's a comment here that says good process served districts well, but a challenge in terms of how to assess district policies, procedures, and practices and changing them. You're right. If I could find the magic wand that allowed us to do that easily, then I'd be a wealthy woman. There's a question here from Deborah. How is understanding related to communication patterns measured in the various elements of evidence? And a very insightful comment about, there's a spectrum of those lesson plans. There are people at different levels of understanding who would name a particular lesson plan as being really good and solid in terms of getting at issues of race and equity, and other people who have a broader and deeper understanding would not. One of the important parts, I think, of engaging this rubric is because you have a team of people that are working together and asking questions and engaging in this. You hope that you've set up your team in a way, which will be our next slide, to get balance and to have perspectives from people who can really push the quality and depth of those conversations. Then I'm seeing just a few other comments. What would hiring practices in the district look like? Would they have to address all elements in the standard rubric? I think the goal is that they would address all the elements in the standard, but again, this is supposed to be kind of a constructivist process where people are really looking at that and then using this to inform their planning. So they may not have them all down, but they may have many of them down and decide to work on a couple that they don't, or they may decide to work on areas where they're just beginning and not worry so much about the fact that they're missing a couple pieces of an standard. So this is all choice making that they'll have to do. I see a clarification on the question from about, I think it was focus area number 15, that providing materials and info in print does not ensure understanding. That is absolutely true. And Dennis, the final response, I think, to your question, academic outcomes, those are actually in focus area 4, and I think, or no, standard 4, focus areas maybe 21, 2, 3, and those all get specifically at looking at academic outcomes back across all of the other evidences. So we're down to about 15 minutes, so I'm going to try to get through the next few key slides. We have maybe 3 big ideas to cover that are about the process, the team and the process. Then we'll have another opportunity for you to answer some questions. So the important part about the team is that the depth and quality of which you'll be able to do this kind of rubric or self-study is really going to be about who's on the team and how much resource, time, space they're given to do that, access to data. So what we recommend is that the superintendent really has to be the one who buys into this as a process and sees the value in that the superintendent conveys that very clearly, sets aside the time and resources for people to work together and do this. So once you get the superintendent on board, the superintendent then needs to identify leaders from every division or department in the district. So again, as you see, we moved across the rubric from general education through accountability. You need directors of special ed, but you also need directors for your data management, or you need directors for your achievement gaps or accountability, curriculum and instruction, English language, community outreach. Whatever those divisions and departments are, they need to be represented in this conversation. We do have some strategies in the next slide for how to create spaces where they can work together and kind of divide and conquer the material, so it's not everybody all the time. The team should also include some school personnel, maybe a couple of principals or instructional coaches, other people that will really be able to contribute that perspective from the school of what this really looks like on the ground versus the perspective that the district team may bring, which may be more administrative in focus. And then finally, you'll want to see if you can get some community members included. One of the things that we do know about culturally responsive practices is that you cannot be culturally responsive if you don't have connections to and understandings of the students, families, and communities that you're working in and serve. And so the degree to which you can get a couple of community members just also helps enrich that conversation. It helps deepen our understanding of some of the issues that were raised, particularly around the curricular kind of pieces and unit plans or lesson plans. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the process, and this is now slide 26. I'd already mentioned, I think, that the superintendent must identify the team. And then you get that in place. I see a question popping up about, isn't it good to have a core team set from beginning to end for consistency? Yes, I'm pretty clear that it would only work if you have a consistent team. That's not to say that you might not have a member or two change or add, but really you do need a core team that takes ownership for this work. So once the team's identified and you make sure that you have the right people on board, our idea is that you have an initial planning day. I'll share an agenda for that in just a moment. In that initial planning or training day, you're doing a review of the tool, helping people understand why they're here, how they're going to use it, how it works, helping them create some shared understanding. And then at the point that they move beyond shared understanding, or once they get to some shared understanding and understand how the tool works, then you need to give them some time to really work together and figure out their strategy for engaging in this process. Once they've done that, then they go away and they do their work. This is where, depending on the size of the district, the size of the team, they may decide that they want to meet, once a month for 3 or 4 months and just hammer it out. They may decide that they would like to divide and conquer and have smaller groups of 3 or 4 people each take on a focus area and go review evidence and figure out where they're at and then come back together to make meaning out of that. There are multiple ways to do that, and it's your expertise as technical assistance providers and facilitators of these kinds of processes that will help them figure that out. If they do that, if they do the divide and conquer kind of thing, they do need to then come back together for a planning day to reach consensus, to figure out how that influences their planning going forward, share their findings, that kind of thing, and develop a plan or recommendations or report to the superintendent. So that's really the 4 steps. Get the team on board, have an initial training day. I had a question in one of our practice rounds about, does it have to be all day? Could it be divided in chunks? I think you could do that and divide it out in chunks. We'll talk about that in the next slide. The teams have to do their work, their self-study, then they have to come back together to create a plan or recommendations or a report and give that to the superintendent. The final thing in this section of the presentation is a slide that shows you a sample agenda. I think we've kind of talked about that, but in general, it's a good idea to do some kind of overview presentation about why the district's here, what the disproportionality issues are, maybe from a national perspective, from the state's perspective, and at the district level. Just something that helps them understand that. If it's a district that you think has some gaps in their understanding about issues of culture and equity, you might want to focus a little bit on that. So some background building. Then you give them a couple of hours to work together, or to understand the rubric and to really look through that, ask questions of it, make sense of it, see if they're on the same page in their general understandings about it. Have some open discussion about that after they've had some time to review it, and then give them that team planning time to kind of figure out how they're going to get this done. The final part of this is to have some presentation of resources they might use. That just sometimes is helpful to get people focused in a direction that they could go. We're now going to do our final activity for this presentation. You'll see that on your screen. In this activity, it just says, now that you've seen the assumptions, the tools, the team, and the processes, what's your biggest worry or concern about using this? And the way we'd like to organize this is think about your biggest worry or concern from the presentation so far. Type your worry or concern in the public chat. Then, instead of me trying to answer all of those, each of you will also answer someone else's question or provide some bit of idea or support. When you do respond to someone else's questions, make sure you include their name so that they can tell that you're responding to them. And I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, and then we'll see where we're at. So you're going to post a question or worry or concern you have, and you're going to respond to one other person. Quite a few comments posted. Jump in and add your responses or ideas. You've got about 2 more minutes or so for this activity. So I'm seeing some great questions and responses being posted. What we're going to do with this, so you can continue to type in questions or responses if you have some over the next few minutes as we go through the last couple of slides. We'll capture all of these, and then I will, in the follow-up call or via an email, respond to them by kind of themes and talk about maybe electronically in that email or call ways that that's played out in other districts, when other states have been trying to do this, things that might help you think through and process that. So not only will we capture this set of questions, we'll have another opportunity for you to send in questions over the next few weeks so that we can try to respond as thoroughly as possible to all of your questions and comments. I'm going to move now to the last couple of slides. We've got just about 3 or 4 minutes left on the call. So I'll go through them rather quickly, but you should have access to them and you can consider these in the questions that you may send or post later. There are 4 big ideas that facilitators need to have particular skill and knowledge around, and one of the things that we'd like to be able to offer is ongoing support to you all should you decide to do this or feel like you need some support in some of these or other areas. But the 4 areas that I believe that you need the most skill and knowledge in order to use this tool is, first of all, broad expertise in the ways that districts and schools are structured. I'm assuming that you all have that or you wouldn't be in technical assistance positions, but if that's something that we could provide some support around, that would be great. Second, you really need to be able to bridge general education concerns and special education processes and really help the district see why this starts in general education, how challenges and problems in general education might drive the disproportionality numbers in a district and create the situation in which larger numbers of students of color are being referred to and identified for special education. You should also be skilled particularly in facilitating participant conversations that will lead to shared understanding of the levels of the rubric. So that's about really knowing enough and feeling confident enough with the rubric and with your understanding of it and with your ability to facilitate difficult conversations. If you actually have a team of people that broadly represents all of the stakeholder groups, you're also going to have people at all different levels of understanding, especially when it comes to issues of culture and class, race and ethnicity, those kinds of issues. You really need to be a strong facilitator in terms of facilitating those harder conversations. And the other thing is, and I think I saw this as one of the worries in the chat session, is that you really do need to understand this tool. So there are lots of elements to it, lots of complexity to it, and you really need to understand all of the elements and be prepared going in for how you want to work with the district and how you want to push those conversations. We had a poll activity. We're not going to do that just because of timing. But the poll activity was basically asking you to self-assess and identify areas that you might want further training in. Again, we'll have an opportunity for you to go ahead and send those kinds of questions or requests for support into us. The final thing that's in this slide is that I did want to share with you a few tools that we have available. These are on the INCREST website, and I think that URL is in your PowerPoint. It's also in the rubric handout. These are all things that are available to you to use at any time. You just go and download them, but they help take this tool to different levels. So the first is a school assessment tool. It helps schools to assess where they stand across a variety of elements similarly to district level rubric. The second is a series of practitioner briefs. There's probably 25 or 30 practitioner briefs. They're all taking the best that we know about culturally responsive literacy instruction or classroom management or inclusive schools and distilling that into about 8 pages that's meant for practitioners to really be able to use and grab hold of. We also have a curriculum review tool that in which groups of teachers can bring curricular units together and kind of compare and think about the level to which they move from a contributions level, this is based on James Banks's work, to a transformational kind of level and really addressing those issues of culture and diversity and equity and access. So that's also available on our website. Then we have a series of professional learning modules. These modules all contain the PowerPoints, activities, handouts, agendas, everything that you would need to guide the training on whichever topic you choose. The topics range, again, culturally responsive classroom management, literacy, instruction, all the specific pieces that you might want to be able to use with the district. After you have completed an assessment, they know where they're trying to go in terms of improvement. They've identified gaps in their knowledge and skills. So that's there and also available for you to download. Finally, we have a final opportunity for questions and sharing. You could share resources, you could ask questions about resources, you could ask final questions. I think the way that we probably like to handle this given timing is to say that you would be able to email those questions in, and then I will respond to those in our follow-up phone call. So I'm going to turn this back over to Connie, and Connie, let you decide what you want to do next.
Thank you very much, Shelley. That was absolutely wonderful.